22 is where we're starting. And today's lesson goes from chapter 22 to chapter 29. So that's 8 chapters that we have to cover today. So Stephanie, you got a lot of reading to do. Okay, ready? Go. Start chapter. But what I thought I would do is, just so we can get through it, we're not going to read every verse of every chapter. We're going to read chapter 22, and then 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. We'll just pick out pieces to read or to kind of go over. And then we'll read 28 and 29. Okay, a lot of the in-between chapters are just lists of people's names and what their job was in the temple and or what their job was in Israel. So we'll kind of highlight that without reading the lists of the names. So, okay, has anyone here ever done the thing, and I probably should have talked to you about this before, Steph, before class, but years ago, Steph used to sell this stuff called Origami Owl, and it's like jewelry. I don't know how you describe it, but she would go to vendor events and she would sell, and there'd be other vendors at these events too. And this one time we were at an event, and I think it was in Thornville, and this one guy he collects gold, and then you give him your gold, he does all these tests to it, and then he tells you how he weighs it, and then he'll give you money for your gold. Has anyone ever done that before? No? Nobody? Okay, thank you. Well, my mom knew that this guy was going to be there, so she sent a few pieces of old jewelry that it was either like broken, a necklace that had broken, or it was some distant relatives that must not have had any sentimental value. I don't remember exactly. And she had us go, and we took it to him, and he would scratch off a little bit and drop it into this little bit of liquid and see if it floated or turned, I don't know, whatever color. And then he did a weight to it, and he told us if it was real gold or costume jewelry or that. Do you remember that, Steph? Kind of? Okay, it's been a long time ago. And then he weighed it, and then he told us, hey, it's $22, there you go. And then we took it to my mom. Do you remember, though, it was not a big amount of money. Does that sound about right? Yeah, okay. Go ahead, you can talk. And I kind of thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And that was his job. He would go from place to place and weigh gold. And then when he gave you the money, obviously then he takes the gold to someone else and he gets a little bit more value for it. And that's how he makes his money. So anyway, so this, and it was a handful of gold items, and whatever we got, 20 or 30 or 40. It was not a whole lot of money for it, and we took it back to my mom. So no one else, so one other person has done that? A jewelry store, same kind of thing. Okay, so has anyone ever done anything like that sort of thing? Anyone? Okay, like pawn shop. I mean, it's not exactly pawn shop, but it's sort of like that. So, and I was thinking about that amount of gold and kind of how much it was worth. And does anyone here have a whole lamp stand at home, like one of your lamps that's completely made of gold at home? A whole set? Yeah, okay. And some forks and spoons and utensils? Okay, well, just if like this a little bit of, I've seen you at the Mexican restaurant and how you're throwing money around and everything. It's pesos, but anyway. But that amount of gold that we had was not a whole lot, and it was worth whatever, $40. Can you imagine how much if I went in here, here's a lampstand of solid gold. Let me have the money for that. Anyway, so keep that in your mind, and now let's start reading, because we'll get to, there's a reason I brought that story up. Okay, so let's turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 22. And I'll read the first chapter to start with. Here we go. Then David said, "This is the house of the Lord God, and this is the altar of burnt offering for Israel." So David gave orders to gather the foreigners who were in the land of Israel. And he set stone cutters to hew out stones to build the house of God. David prepared large quantities of iron to make the nails for the doors of the gates, and for the clamps, and more bronze than could be weighed, and timbers of cedar logs beyond number for the Sidonians and Tyrians brought large quantities of cedar timber to David. David said, "My son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house that is to be built for the Lord shall be exceedingly magnificent, famous and glorious throughout all lands. Therefore now I will make preparation for it." So David made ample preparations before his death. Then he called for his son Solomon and charged him to build a house for the Lord God of Israel. David said to Solomon, "My son, I had intended to build a house to the name of the Lord my God. But the word of the Lord came to me, saying, You have shed much blood, and you have waged great wars. You shall not build a house to my name, because you have shed so much blood on the earth before me. Behold, a son will be born to you who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all of his enemies on every side, for his name shall be Solomon. And I will give peace and quiet to Israel in his days. He shall build a house for my name, and he shall be my son, and I will be his father. I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. Now, my son, the Lord will be with you, that you may be successful, and build the house of the Lord your God, just as he has spoken concerning you. Only the Lord give you discretion and understanding, and give you charge over Israel, so that you may keep the law of the Lord your God. Then you will prosper if you are careful to observe the statutes and the ordinances which the Lord commanded Moses concerning Israel. Be strong and courageous, do not fear nor be dismayed. Now behold, with great pains I have prepared for the house of the Lord 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver, and bronze and iron beyond weight, for they are in great quantity. Also timber and stone I have prepared, and you may add to them. Moreover, there are many workmen with you, stone cutters and masons of stone and carpenters, and all men who are skillful in every kind of work. Of the gold, the silver, and the bronze, and the iron there is no limit. Arise and work, and may the Lord be with you." David also commanded all the leaders of Israel to help his son Solomon, saying, "Is not the Lord your God with you, and has he not given you the rest on every side? For he has given the inhabitants of the land into my hand, and the land is subdued before the Lord and before his people. Now set your heart and your soul to seek the Lord your God. Arise, therefore, and build the sanctuary of the Lord God, so that you may bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the holy vessels of God into the house that is to be built for the name of the Lord." Okay. So David gets all the items ready. He gets all the workers ready. They've got the iron, the bronze, the cedar, the gold, the silver. He's just kind of getting everything together here. And then over these next few chapters, he's going to start to divide up people to do jobs. My grandpa, Sprague, on my dad's side, used to say that if he could get, my grandpa Sprague was really good with building stuff. He built a couple houses they lived in. He could fix cars. He was just the opposite of what I am. And he would get me and my brother sometimes to go help him on a project, or he'd get me and my cousin to help him on a project. And he would tell us, look, if I have one, teenager to help me, because I can get a lot done. If I have 2 teenagers to help me, I can get a little bit more done. He said, if I have 3 teenagers to help me, I get less done. And if I have 4, I get less done. He would think that the more, after a certain point, there's a break point. After a certain amount of helpers, they start to talk and visit and kind of complain about what they're doing, so he liked that 1 to 2 level helpers, and then after that it's teenagers start to get into unions and stuff like that and demand rights, that type of thing. So and there is something to that. I saw what he was talking about, but here David's getting everything ready, and so why can't he build the temple? What's the reason? Shed too much blood, yep. And okay, so, and it doesn't out and out say it, but why do you think that mattered? What do you think? Just your opinion. Why did God think it'd be better if someone who was not a warrior be the primary builder of the temple? Anybody have an opinion or guess or anything? Well, I think it's partly what you would want associated with the temple. we don't have to turn there exactly, but in 2 Chronicles 6, Solomon, this is when the temple's all done. He's starting to do a dedication. And and it's a real long chapter of what he wants this temple to be about. But even part of it, he talks about, in 2 verses, he even wants foreigners from other countries to be able to look at this temple and see God and see what God has done for his people, so that even foreigners can recognize it. And I think that's part of it, that, if a man who just conquered and wiped out people, killed a lot of people, was the person who built the temple, people would think, is this a temple to war and conquering and bloodshed? God would rather it be a temple of someone who was a peaceful king built it.
Michigan building the Ohio State University campus.
Yeah.
Would it be the same?
Right. It wouldn't. Yeah. That's a pretty good analogy. Good job. Okay. So these next few chapters, we're just going to kind of, I'll summarize it for you, I guess, because it'd be a lot of, like I said, name reading. In chapter 23, Solomon and David are just going to kind of divide up responsibilities, okay? So in chapter 23, I'll just pick out some verses to read. Now, when David reached old age, he made his son Solomon king over Israel. He gathered together all the leaders of Israel with the priests and the Levites. And the Levites were numbered from 30 years old and upward, and their number of the census of men was 38,000. So then it talks about how they took that 38,000 and then divided 24,000 to be overseers of the work of the house of the Lord. 6,000 would be the officers and judges. 4,000 were gatekeepers, and 4,000 who would play instruments of praise for the worship service. So that's, what if we had 38,000 deacons here at the church? That's a lot of people to be doing work around the temple, 38,000. And they had specific jobs for each of them. Then it talks about, the Gershonites, the Kohathites, and the Merarites. So these were, again, divisions of the tribe of Levi, okay? And who was supposed to be the priests? What lineage? Does anyone remember? There's a Levites, and within the Levites, there was a famous person. He was a brother of Moses, Aaron. It was like Aaron and his sons. Here in chapter 24, we'll talk a little bit more about them. But when they were traveling in the wilderness, the Gershonites, so their job was to take care of the skins that made up the tabernacle, the covering of the tabernacle. The Kohathites, their job was to take care of the furniture that was inside the tabernacle when they're traveling. And the Merarites were in charge of the pillars and the structures that held up the tabernacle. So, and you think, so what? But just think about when people over here go camping. I mean, no. Okay, stuff that's out in nature takes kind of a beating. And think about if anyone's ever here moved, okay? What if you were constantly moving, like the way they were in the wilderness, moving all the time? Wouldn't that be fun to move every day? Yeah, that'd be a great time. But it would help if everyone, I know I have the pillar in the right south edge corner. This is me and my 3 guys. This is our job to get it and set it up. Things would go a lot smoother if things were kind of organized, or if I knew I had to move the table where the showbread was. That's my group's job. So it was good to have it kind of divided up and organized. Okay. Let's go on to chapter 24. Oh, one thing here too, before we get into chapter 24. In verse 24, In Numbers, they had put the age of Levi service, you started at age 30, okay? David changed it to age 20. Not a big deal, but it gives them a few more numbers of people to be able to serve. So go on to chapter 24. This divides up the Levites, like I said, and it talks about the sons of Aaron. Real quick here, in I'll read verse 1 and 2. Now the divisions of the descendants of Aaron were these. The sons of Aaron were Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. But Nadab and Abihu died before their father and had no sons. So Eleazar and Ithamar served as priests. And then it goes on to talk about their families. Why did Nadab and Abihu die? Now this wasn't recent, this is a long, long time ago. Why did Nadab and Abihu die? Review. Yeah, they offered strange fire or foreign fire. Don't know what it was, but they did something wrong that they knew they weren't supposed to do, and they were killed. One thing it talked about when I was reading about that part, it's kind of interesting. Nadab and Abihu had a certain type of headwear, a certain type of robe. They'd gone through this process to be, I guess, consecrated. They'd even taken blood and put blood on their earlobes, their toes, and their fingers from a sacrifice and let it dry there just to completely get them in the right mindset to serve the right way. And then they, I guess, knowingly did something wrong with the fire. So they had everything just right and then messed up. It's, something that we can, a lot of it's our heart, isn't it? I mean, we can do all the showing of doing the right stuff, but if our heart's not right, when we go to serve and worship. Okay, so the rest of chapter 24 is just kind of naming the different people who are going to serve in the office of priests. You can read that on your own if you like. Chapter 25. Okay. Here they divide up again and they list the musicians, and their number was 288 in verse 7. And then there's those names. Chapter 26, they have the list of the gatekeepers. Okay, so if you again, when they're dividing people up, there's the people who actually serve in the worship service, 24,000. There's 6,000 who were officers and judges to help with that process. 4,000 were gatekeepers, and then 4,000 were like the instruments and singing for the worship service, the temple worship services. Of those four jobs, how would you kind of rank them in importance? There were the people who helped with the worship, the people who were judges, the people who were gatekeepers, and people who, as people were coming in the temple, they were doing the singing and the instrument playing to kind of help people get the right mood for worship, the right frame of mind. Okay, so of those four, I'll just have you raise your hands. Who thinks that, I'll do it this way, who do you think is the least of the important? Okay, and it's okay to have an opinion for a second, because then I'll correct you in a minute. Who thinks that actually serving in the worship service, helping with the sacrifices, the people come in, here's the right type of animal that you need to sacrifice. I'm going to help you sacrifice this animal and say your prayer, and here's the incense. Okay, who thinks that part is the least important of the four? Okay. Who thinks the people who were the officers and the judges, the people who, when there was a dispute between two people, they heard the dispute and they made a decision, who thinks that's the least important? Okay, good. Who thinks that the instrument, the people who were the musicians and playing the instruments as people were coming into the temple, helping you get in the right frame of mind to worship, singing praises to God, who thinks that's the least important? Okay, so good. So who thinks that the people who stood at the gate, ticket please, who thinks that's the least important? Okay, thank you so much. Well, in Psalm, and you would think in a way it is, but the one commentary I read talked about how even though this seems to be like lower on the scale of, I don't know if importance or prestigious of the 4 jobs, it's kind of one of the most important, because as the people are walking into the temple, they are helping the people physically and spiritually get prepared to be in the right frame of mind to go in and worship. So they're like a gatekeeper, of not just a physical gatekeeper, but a spiritual gatekeeper. If you can kind of picture that, like, whoa, you know, this is a very holy place you're getting ready to enter. Holy place physically, but holy place spiritually. So, you know, there's a proper frame of mind to be in when you enter here. And in Psalm 84, the psalmist writes about, I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the temple of the Lord rather than dwell in the tent of the wickedness, of the wicked. So there is some reference to that there. Okay. Okay.
Let's say that there wasn't a gatekeeper and anybody who wanted to come in could come in. Let's just say then that you could sit where you wanted to sit. There may or may not be a band and they hadn't practiced, but they're on the field. And then those that are at the podium on the field, so to speak, played a game, but they didn't really practice. And it was what it was. Would the experience be the same without each and every one of those
Yeah.
people doing what they're doing? Is there a reason for each one of those people? So as a whole, if they work as a team and work together, it's quite an experience. But missing one of those areas makes a huge difference. So all of them have importance. Whether they're degrees or not, I don't think that's important in my opinion.
Well, and then too, you notice when one area is deficient. When you, like, if you went out and the band is doing one of their fancy, the scripture higher, and what if somebody accidentally forgets the O? You know. One year, this is years ago. Is anyone else here from Athens? I know the halls are. Okay, well, years ago, this young man named Joe Burrow was a quarterback for Athens High School, and his team made it to the state championship game his senior year, and that was the first year it had moved back from the state championship game had been in Massillon, Canton, Ohio, and it moved back to Columbus for a cycle. And my brother and I went up, we were going to go watch it. It was a Thursday night game. Athens was playing against Toledo Central Catholic, and we went up to watch it, and it was at Ohio State Stadium, but they had only opened up one gate because they thought, well, it's a high school game, they won't need as much. And the line was just way out in the parking lot. My brother and I, you know, were waiting. And these, I guess it must have been the days before we bought stuff online, you know, because it was just Ticketgate. And we could hear, you know, stuff going on inside the stadium, like, it's going to start. And we finally did get in the game. We missed the first little bit of it, but it's because they didn't have the gatekeepers, you know, enough gates open. They didn't have the gatekeepers working correctly. It kind of ruined at least the beginning of the game for us. So yeah, I agree with that. Anybody else? Okay, so all the jobs are important.
So the answer to all that,
I lost Jerry.
none of the above.
Yes. Everybody, whatever job you have, you do it the best you can, you know. Because, you know, it's just, you know, in God's sight, you know, whether it's the 2 mites or the lots and lots of money the rich people are putting in, it's how you do it, what your effort is, where your heart is. Okay. Where are we? Let's see. Okay, so chapter 26 is the division of the gatekeepers. In verses 20 through 28, it talks about the people who kept a treasure. And there's a lot of treasure associated with the temple. In verses 29 through 32, it talks about the overseers of the different parts of Israel, and including, just so they're not forgotten, the tribes west of Jordan. Gad, Reuben, and half of Manasseh. So they have overseers for them as well as the rest of Israel. Okay. Here's the part I do want to spend a little bit more time on, chapter 27. This is interesting. So these first, how many verses? 15 verses, and again, we're not going to read verse by verse, but they divide up the army of Israel into service. Okay, who here gets, like, when you're working, 3 weeks of vacation, okay? And you may get more than 3 weeks of vacation a year, okay? 4 weeks, 5 weeks of vacation, anybody? Oh, the teacher's raising his hand. That's not, no, that doesn't count. Yeah, okay, so, about 2 to 3 months of vacation is pretty good. That's probably the best we could get. Not counting retired people. I don't want to, my mom and dad are so happy that they're retired, and I'm jealous of them, but, okay. So the way this works is, and this isn't exactly, but they're talking here about the army, and every month, 24,000 soldiers come and are like active duty, and it lists the 24,000 soldiers with their commander. So every month, and for the 12 months, they rotate. So that'd be a pretty good deal, wouldn't it? You work 1 month, you're off 11. Yeah? That's just for active duty soldiers. I mean, most of these people were farmers or herders, so it's more like Army Reserve, I guess. That for 1 month a year, they're on active duty with their commander, like a standing army ready to repel an invasion, take care of trouble, that type of thing. And then if they have an actual war, then they call on everybody to kind of muster out. But it's kind of interesting. That's kind of a neat system. For 1 month, 24,000 men are armed and ready to go. Okay, the thing I wanted to point out with this chapter was down in verse 5. I'm going to read that one. So here at this point, they list the person and the month they had, and then there are 24,000 people. In verse 5, the third commander of the army for the third month was Benahiah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest, as chief, and in his division were 24,000. Verse 6, this Benahiah was the mighty man of the 30 and had charge of the 30, and over his division was Ammizabad, his son. Okay, so this Benahiah, I was kind of, because I teach the teen class, I've been kind of working a couple lessons ahead. He gets mentioned a lot next week. And he gets mentioned a lot previously too. And he's known for, during the war with Moab, there was these two like Moab champions that come out. He goes out and kills them both. And it talks about one day he goes down into a pit to kill a lion. He wrestles and kills a lion that was in a snowy pit. And one day it talked about there's this Egyptian giant, had this big long spear it talked about, there's like a weaver's rod spear. And Benaniah goes down with a club against a giant with a spear, and at some point he gets the spear, breaks the spear, and kills the giant. I mean, this guy kind of sounds kind of like Dwayne Johnson in a way. He's just doing everything, action. He's in charge of one of the months. He's also of the 30 toughest guys in David's army. He's like the leader of the 30. He's also in charge of David's bodyguard in another part of the scriptures. And here next week you'll see so once Solomon becomes king, Benaniah becomes like his tough, his guy. He uses Benaniah to kind of correct a lot of the things that David let happen, and he uses Benaniah to, I won't spoil it for you, but to kill some people who need to be taken care of before Solomon becomes king. So he's just an interesting guy to me. Let's go on to chapter 28. Oh, and it's interesting too that Benaniah is the son of Jehoiada, the priest. So his dad's like this priest of God, and then Benaniah is this action guy. look down, before we get into 20, at the end of verse 27, chapter 27, verse 32, this just talks about some of the officials in David's kingdom. Also, Jonathan, David's uncle, was a counselor, a man of understanding, and a scribe. And Jehiel, the son of Hachmoni, tutored the king's sons. Ahithophel was counselor to the king, and Hushai the Archite was the king's friend. You know, a couple weeks ago, Jason was talking about how things don't exactly happen chronologically in order in the Bible. And these parts of these chapters might have happened at different times in David's reign. He might have been getting the wood and the silver and the gold together at different times. Here it talks about his counselors. Obviously now Ahithophel is not one of his counselors, because you guys remember Ahithophel was one of the counselors that took somebody's side when he rebelled against David. Who rebelled against David? Absalom. And Ahithophel was the one that David was like, I'm afraid of Ahithophel. He's going to give him advice, and it's going to be to my detriment. And then this Hushai, the other guy that's mentioned, says, look, I'll stay behind, and I'll kind of, whatever Ahithophel says, I'm going to say the opposite. And he's the one that, when Absalom followed Hushai's advice, Ahithophel actually went and killed himself. So these names kind of come up again. And then verse 34, Jehoiada, the son of Benaiah. So right there, okay, so a second ago we said Benaiah was the son of Jehoiada, the high priest. And here it says Jehoiada is the son of Benaiah. Anyone have a guess as to why that is? I think it's just that there was a Benaiah who had a Jehoiada who became the priest, and he liked his dad's name, so he named his son Benaiah. That's my best guess. It's just like a family name. Okay. And then Joab was the commander of the king's army. Okay. Chapter 28. Stay with me. I know this is a lot of kind of drier stuff here, but okay, so we're going to read some of chapter 28. Maybe we won't. Okay, we'll try to read some of it. Now David assembled at Jerusalem all the officials of Israel, the princes of the tribes and the commanders of the divisions that served the king. So all these people they just have been naming for these last few chapters. He gets them all together. Verse 2, then King David rose to his feet and said, listen to me, my brethren and my people. I had intended to build a permanent home for the ark of the covenant of the Lord, for the footstool of our God, so I had made preparations to build it. But God said to me, you shall not build a house for my name, because you are a man of war and have shed blood. So this is a lot of a repeat of what we had read in 22. Yet the Lord, the God of Israel, chose me from all of the house of my father to be king over Israel forever. For he has chosen Judah to be a leader, and in the house of Judah my father's house. And among the sons of my father he took pleasure in me to make me king over all Israel. And this verse is kind of interesting to me. He says in verse 5, of all my sons, for the Lord has given me many sons. Did David really need to say that? After everything they've been through with Absalom, and here in a while will be Adonijah and Amnon. For of all my sons, for the Lord has given me many sons. He has chosen my son Solomon to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord of Israel. I do think he needed to say that. He needs to pronounce that, look, it's going to be Solomon, not one of my other sons, especially Adonijah, who's older than Solomon. And I will establish his kingdom forever if he resolutely performs my commandments and my ordinances as is done now. So now in the sight of all Israel, the assembly of God, and in the hearing of our God, observe and seek after all the commandments of the Lord your God, so you may possess the good land and bequeath it to your sons after you forever. And then he talks a little bit more about Solomon, the plan for the temple. Okay, here we go. Verse 14. For the golden utensils, the weight of gold for all utensils for every kind of service, for the silver utensils, for the weight of silver for all utensils for every kind of service, for the weight of gold for the golden lampstands, and for their golden lamps, with the weight of each lampstand for its lamps, and the weight of silver for the silver lampstands. And then on down to 16, the gold by weight of the tables of showbread for each table, and silver for the silver tables, for the forks, the basins, the pitchers of pure gold. And it goes on and on like this. There's the gold for the model of the chariot, even the cherubim with their spread wings. lots and lots of gold and silver. Down in chapter 29, they even take offerings from, David even offers more of his own personal wealth, gold and silver and gems, and other people do too, and talks about 10,000 talents of silver, 18,000 talents of brass, 100,000 talents of iron, 5,000 talents and 10,000 talents of gold. So this is a lavish temple, lots of gold, lots of, like one lampstand in this temple is worth more than my house, I mean, basically. So let's read David's prayer real quick, and we'll finish with that. So in verse 10, so David blessed the Lord in the sight of all the assembly, and David said, "Blessed are you, O Lord of God, Israel our Father, forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. Indeed, everything that is in the heavens and the earth, yours is the dominion, O Lord, and you exalt yourself as head over all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all, and in your hand is power and might, and it lies in your hand to make great and to strengthen everyone. Now therefore, our God, we thank you and praise your glorious name. But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to offer as generously as all this? For all things come from you, and from your hand we have given you." That's what I wanted to get to. I mean, it's good that David is trying his best and giving his best, and all this money's poured into the temple, but even he realizes that it's all God's anyway. This all came from God, it's all is God's, and that's kind of the right attitude. Does anyone have any comments? This is kind of, go ahead.
David is in his mid to late 70s. He's about ready to die. He's had a hard life. He's tired. He can't even keep himself warm. But he's bright enough to realize that he's investing in the future. He is setting things aside. It still took about 20 years to build what needed to be built. The application is, are we investing in the future, or are we indebting ourselves in the future? Are we planning for the future? There are two countries in the world today that have invested almost 30, 40 years in the future. There's countries that have done just the opposite. There is a great lesson there. There's something we need to think about in our own families, communities, and government.
Yeah, in like the summary part, I was talking about that same thing. Planning with effort, planning with sacrifice, and planning by doing your best. That's kind of the overall lesson with all this. We're going to go ahead and read the last 3 verses here. Now, and like you said, yeah, there'll be, because it's not exactly in chronological order, this talks about David's death, but another place they do talk about how David, as he was getting older, had to have help keeping his temperature up. Then David died in a ripe old age, full of days, riches, and honor, and his son Solomon reigned in his place. Now the acts of King David from first to last are written in the Chronicles of Samuel the seer, in the Chronicles of Nathan the prophet, in the Chronicles of Gad the seer, with all his reign, his power, and his circumstances which came on him, on Israel, and all the kingdoms of the lands. So, okay. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for your comments.